You're listening to the Business Wealth Impact Podcast, your source for empowering information and cutting-edge ideas from the world's top minds. I'm your host, Jeanne Amlour, founder of seven-figure coaching company, Jeanne Amlour International. Join me on a journey to unleash your potential and create your highest success. Welcome to Business Wealth Impact. Hello and welcome to Business Wealth Impact. Today we have Rachel Radway, who's a certified leadership coach, speaker, and author with over 25 years experience in corporate leadership roles. Rachel helps high-achieving, highly perceptive, and neurodivergent clients get out of their own way and lead with confidence. Her book, Perceptive, launched May 22nd. Welcome, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Sean. I'm thrilled to be here and talk with you.
Okay, so, this is a great subject because a lot of people are diagnosed and self-diagnosed as neurodivergent. And you've written the book not just for neurodivergent people, but for highly perceptive people as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's good because we're not diagnosing, we're not trying to diagnose anybody here. And that covers a very wide umbrella. So I love that. And your book Perception, from what you've told me, because we chatted a lot about it, is that you help people to succeed and operate better in the workplace if they're any of those. Is that correct?
That's correct. So the book is called Perceptive, and the subtitle is Insights for Leaders Who Feel More, Process Deeply, and Think Differently. And part of what the book talks about is the fact that the labels are less important than recognizing that we all are wired a little bit differently, and that those of us who have been given messages all our lives that we are broken, or we are too much, or we are too emotional, or we're not enough. None of that is true. We all have gifts. We all have leadership assets. And it's just a question of understanding how you're thinking a little bit differently can lead you to leverage those assets and succeed and thrive.
Now, that is super interesting because, just people think differently. If you're a man or a woman, you think differently. If you're from another culture, you think differently. If you are the middle child of a family, you might think differently, right? You're from a religion or not, or you're from Texas or from California, you might think differently.
Sure.
Okay, so I love that this is broad. So what can people do in the workplace if they feel like they're not fitting in and they're thinking differently? What are some tips or ways to actually operate better?
So generally the people that I talk with have specific kinds of challenges that they face. It's not really a question of, yes, there are cultural differences, there are social differences. This is more a question of the way our brains work and not the specific thoughts that we hold. So one of the things that often rings bells for people is a story that I tell about a 360 feedback session that I had several years ago when I was in a leadership role in corporate. I was told that people had the impression that I was stomping on their ideas, and they felt that I wasn't a team player. And hearing that feedback crushed me. I actually cried when I heard it because I was in team operations. That was the last thing that I intended. I wanted to support people and support the team and help us move forward. And later, in doing all of the research that I've been doing around this topic, I learned a few things. One of them is people who are highly sensitive and more attuned to their environment, and that's a term that I talk about. And highly sensitive isn't always a term that leaders want to adopt in the workplace, especially. So I also talk about highly perceptive. Our brains are actually wired to optimize for successful group outcomes rather than successful individual outcomes, which is not the norm, especially in certain cultures, especially in the American culture, for example. Another thing I learned was that all of us who have brains that work in a certain way, we are pulling in more information and filtering out less. In other words, the brain takes in a certain amount of data per second, and most of it is filtered out. We just have things in place in our brain that filter that out. Some of us have fewer filters. We're perceiving more, and therefore we're able to make connections among more pieces of data, and we can do it very quickly. And what was happening when I got that feedback was somebody would come up with an idea if we were brainstorming, for example, and I would immediately see all of the reasons why it couldn't work because I was putting all that data together very, very quickly without even realizing it. And more importantly, without realizing that other people's brains weren't doing the same thing. So instead of communicating, I just jumped to the next thing and I was like, oh, that won't work. But I wasn't doing it to stump on the idea. I was doing it to help the team move forward to something that I thought could be more productive. Knowing all of this, I can change the way I communicate and I can back off. I can explain. I can yes and say, that's a great idea. What if we thought about doing it a slightly different way? Because. So I'm
Mm.
not stomping on anything. I'm not jumping ahead. I'm explaining my thought process. But years ago, when I didn't know all of that, it never would have occurred to me to explain or to communicate differently.
Okay, but I have a problem with that. Some
Okay.
ideas just are bad. Some are just
Yes,
bad. And we've all
absolutely.
worked in teams where people have lame ideas. Let's just be real. And there's something wrong with us having to validate a bad idea that somebody has not thought through and everybody gets a prize. I have a problem with that actually. And there's a problem there. I get what you're saying. It could have been a halfway decent idea. But if it's irredeemable and just a bad idea because that individual didn't think it through
Mhm,
and you did very quickly,
mhm.
then why should you say that's a great idea? Because we have to mollycoddle for people that aren't doing the job. And I know this is really not nice what I'm saying, but it has to be said that there's a mollycoddling. What if you're in a high achieving group that isn't overset, that's so high achieving, we all know we're just going to say what we think, even though we're highly perceptive, highly sensitive and everything. We have an agreement.
Okay.
Sure, let's just tell each other the truth. Okay.
So that's a very different
Yeah.
kind of scenario. And if you have that agreement, I think that's great. I am not suggesting to mollycoddle, and I am not suggesting to pretend that there is merit in what is really a terrible idea. Ideally, you have a group that has worked together, you know each other, you have psychological safety, you have an agreement, whether it's spoken or unspoken, that you're going to tell each other the truth and not couch it in all kinds of,
Mm.
nonsense. That said, there are situations where you don't know each other as well, and you may not have those agreements, or you haven't established that trust yet. In which case, it's not about lying and saying it's a great idea. It is about explaining your thought process, though, and not just jumping 3 steps ahead and leaving everybody else behind you.
For
That's
sure.
my main point.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. Then it would be, hey, you know, that's could be a good idea. However, these are all the reasons why that probably won't work in a
Exactly.
nice way, right?
Exactly.
But you didn't do that. You were just like, that's not going to work. Boom. But it's not even about that is a good idea. It could be, okay, that sounds like it might be a good idea, but these are the reasons why that might not work. So
Right.
then they're not hoping that it's going to be in any way, shape, or form you know, executed. Okay. So there's
Absolutely.
some nuances here that I probably wouldn't dig if I have to pretend like everybody wins a prize. And I think that is one of yes, we want to communicate. No, we don't want to stomp on people. Yes, we want to be productive and we don't want people to shrink and not come up with good ideas. However, people need to be told the truth more in a nice way, I think. That's just what I think.
I agree with you. And I misspoke when I said that's a great idea as an example, because
Right. Okay.
it probably wasn't if that's where we're going with it.
Now let's move on. Now, how can people, let's just say that somebody thinks differently in a certain way, and it's somebody that shares a lot of information, and maybe that information is too much sharing, as we were talking about.
Mhm.
Who's the type of person that is the overshare of information? Who's that kind of person?
So, a lot of people who are neurodivergent, one of the things that is a fairly common with the trait is we need a lot, and I say we because I am neurodivergent. We need a lot of context. There are rarely questions that are asked where there's a yes or no answer. There are shades of gray. There are different scenarios. Are you talking about this in this kind of context or in this kind of context? Because we need a lot of context ourselves or prefer it, we often assume that other people want that too. And sometimes, just for clarity's sake, we want to give a lot of detail. We want to support what we're saying. That's often the way that we like it. That said, there are a lot of people that don't want that context. And there are a lot of people that may want it, but already have it. So For example, when someone is talking to me, even though I tend to give a lot of context, if someone's talking to me, I'm downloading all the information and I'm jumping 3 steps ahead. I may not need all the context they want to give me. So there's something called the 3 sentence rule that I love to talk with people about because it is a great way of concisely presenting your information. And then people can come back and ask you for more if they want more. And with the 3 sentence rule, say somebody asks you a question, and you can do this in presentations too. The first sentence is generally addressing their question. It's giving the most direct possible answer. The second sentence is opening up a little bit and providing a little more detail and a little more context without going into a whole story. And the third sentence can be a couple of different things. It can be a question, if you're in a conversation, to turn it back over to them. It can also be a tying of everything together if you're at the end of a discussion or the end of a presentation. And then you stop and you give it over to the person that you're talking with to either pick up on something you said and ask you a question, or to take it in a different direction, or to ask you to go into more detail on some of those things.
It's so interesting because I used to do leadership coaching, and the major problem was people did not give enough context. They were
Interesting.
like, here's what we need to do and why, but not babble on, of course.
Mhm.
One of the biggest problems was that people need to know why they're doing something instead of
Absolutely.
just being told, go do this. So it had to be like, I would like this done by a time. They had to have a time and where to submit it. So please get this done. And this is what I want done. And by tomorrow at 9 a.m., please have that on my desk. So a where
Mhm.
and then a why,
Mhm.
because we got the client coming in at 1 and I'm going to need that by, 9 to look it over.
Mhm.
And apparently that was what I used to teach because there was always that thing of just get that done. Well, wait a minute. By when? What do you want done? Where do I have to submit it? And why? Why do we need it then? And
Yeah.
people think that, why should we tell people this? No, they need the context of why it's so important that that deadline is such, it's not random. Okay, so that's the 3-second rule. Let's pretend then somebody, what about the inverse? Okay, with people that aren't giving enough information, because there's a lot of people. Also, one of the major problems in corporations and workplaces is people withhold information.
Right. I think what's important about the withholding information is that there are a lot of different reasons behind that, potential reasons. Sometimes it's just a leadership style, and people think, I'm the boss. Why do I need to give out other information? You should be just doing what I say. That's a little bit different from some of the issues that come up with the people that I typically work with, because that's a leadership training issue and an attitude that needs to be changed. And frankly, you're just not going to get the most engagement or the most productivity that way, or the most trust. What I run across more often is people who are afraid to speak up because they have been given the message so often that they talk too much, or that what they're saying isn't worthwhile, or they're used to being trampled on. Other people's voices are louder. So, because they're so sensitive to the way everyone comes across, they're also very sensitive to the way they come across. And they don't want to speak up unless spoken to, kind of thing. And my advice for these people is, generally, you're smart. You have so much to offer. You have had successes in business. You may be in a leadership role. There are times when it is appropriate to sit back and listen and absorb and observe. And you may be often in meetings will experience several people saying the same thing just because they think they want their voices to be heard. And so a lot of neurodivergent people are so aware of that, they don't want to add to that dynamic. They don't want to speak up just to be another voice to be heard. But you need to know when it is important for your voice to be heard and that it is. And in that case, do it in a way that shows your experience, your wisdom, what you have that will add to the conversation. Show your value and make sure that you don't go overboard and talk too much while you're doing it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Sure. So say somebody is self-diagnosed neurodivergent or highly sensitive or highly perceptive.
Hmm.
What's just and they're working and they feel like they're misunderstood,
Hmm.
basically,
Hmm.
right? What's just the general like mood? What do they do apart from the 3 sentence rule? What's that broader way of succeeding at work?
So there isn't necessarily one way because it's going to depend on a lot of things. The first one is just self awareness and what kind of, see if you can identify the situations in which you feel different. What are other people doing? How are they succeeding in ways that you feel you're not? So one example is someone who is constantly going up for a promotion and they're told that they do great work and they're just not getting it. What have you asked for feedback specifically about what you are or are not doing? Have you shared your interest in professional development and growth with your boss? Have you talked with them about what you would need to do to get to that next level? If you're doing all the right things and you're getting positive feedback and they're telling you that you're doing great and you're still not getting it, then we have to go deeper to figure out what that disconnect is. And it can be a lot of different things. So there isn't one easy solution. It can be the way that you're communicating. It might be too much. It might be not enough. It could be. So some neurodivergent people, if you're autistic, for example, some autistic people have trouble with direct eye contact. In our society, that can be held against you because people are often looking for a cultural fit rather than a skills fit or other kinds of value that you can contribute. So then it's time to make a decision. What are your goals? What brings you joy and value in your everyday work? And where do you want to go with that? Do you want to try to mask and change your own behavior to fit into what's socially acceptable in that particular corporate culture? Or do you want to leave, go somewhere else, find a culture that might be a better fit for you? Or maybe it's a role thing. Maybe you want a role that is less dependent on being social and looking at people directly and, being up on stage, as it were. Um, so that's a very individual thing that we need to figure out.
Mm.
But it comes down to self awareness, asking for feedback, and being not only receptive to and open to that feedback, because if you're highly sensitive, you can take things very, very personally. It can be very hard to accept feedback. It's also about being discerning and understanding what feedback is coming from a place of someone wanting to help you and add value, and what feedback is more judgmental and is coming from a more personal perspective from the other person.
Mm. Okay, so I am a highly sensitive and highly perceptive person. So I don't know if I'm neurodivergent, but I'm certainly part of that. And what I found was really important was the ability to grow more grit and to just say, you know, people are just giving feedback. I'm not going to die. So do you? Because really, that's the key. Is that we have to learn if we're highly sensitive and highly perceptive to operate, I believe, by letting things just roll, like roll over more, like
Mhm.
water off a duck's back. And I feel that a lot of people lack, there you
I
go,
have it
water off a
on my
duck's back.
desk for exactly that reason, as a
Okay.
little reminder.
Right. Well, I mean, we're on the same wavelength here. And I found that a lot of people that haven't developed past the, oh, I'm highly sensitive, I'm highly perceptive, or perhaps neurodivergent, it's more like a label for themselves. Therefore, this is how I am, and I believe that there should be training. And you got the duck. We've got to learn how to be more gritty and just say, you know what, this is the world. People are going to give me feedback, and I need to toughen up a bit in a good way. Is that kind of what you teach as well?
So, yes and no. It's interesting because I actually have a mastermind called GRIT. It's called the GRIT Collaborative. And in this case, GRIT is an acronym for grace, resilience, intuition, and trust. And I focus more on those things than on the grit itself. Some of it is learning to give ourselves grace. If you have grown up in an environment where your sensitivity, your neurodivergence, whatever it is, has gotten a lot of negative messaging, one of the things you have to do is rebuild your own confidence. That's the first step before you can start building grit, getting gritty, because people have torn you down. And yet there's still, you have so many gifts, you have so many assets, you have so many things that could make you an amazing leader, but you have to believe that yourself. And so that's one of the things that people need to work on first. It's one thing to say you have to toughen up. If you're just trying to toughen up and you're not getting any positive reinforcement or messages that things you're doing have value, if you're not feeling like you have value yourself, it's going to be impossible to toughen up. There are also environments that are tougher and not as tough. I mean, there are bro environments, right? Where like work hard, play hard. If that resonates with you, great. Then that's a culture that could be really good for you. A lot of the more sensitive people I know are not interested in being in that kind of culture. They want something that is much more human centered and focused on the person. It's not how many whatevers can you produce per day. It's, are you delivering the service to your customers that they really expect? It's about quality and not quantity, right? And it's about the interactions. So there's so much in there about, again, back to self-awareness and back to what are your values and your goals internally and what makes the most sense for you. And in some cases, yeah, you will need to get grittier.
Right. Resilience is a good word for it, actually.
Yes.
That's a better word. And it really doesn't matter what workplace it is, because sensitive people, no matter what anybody says to you, you take it the wrong way often. And it might, often if you're that sensitive, any criticism can be seen as something bad. I certainly used to see it that way. Why are they being so mean? And couldn't they be nicer about it? So it's not about the play hard, work hard. That's an extreme in my mind. It's more like if a sensitive person is told by anybody, I don't like your idea, a sensitive person is going to be like, "Aw," and be kind of hurt by that, right? And even if it's the best workplace possible, you're still going to get constructive feedback, even
True.
if it's not critical, right?
I agree. And yet I disagree with the premise that the workplace doesn't matter, because I have worked in so many different workplaces, and I can tell you it does make a difference.
Oh, no, for sure. For sure it makes a difference. But what I meant was, I don't think it's just is it a work hard, play hard or a not? I'm
No,
saying
it's both.
that sensitive people are going to be sensitive anywhere. It's just going to be way worse if it's that lethal, of course.
Exactly. And
Right?
if you're in a culture where people have the kind of agreement that you were talking about before, or where you know that people just genuinely care about each other and have empathy and have compassion, yes, there will still be constructive criticism, but A, those people may try to communicate it in a way that's a little bit softer so that it can land a little bit differently. And B, that's a good environment to learn, okay, what can I take from this feedback? Is it, where is it coming from? Is it genuinely meant to help me improve the way that I'm showing up or my performance in a specific area? What can you take from the feedback that is constructive for you, regardless of where it came from or the way that it was communicated? So there is absolutely work that needs to happen internally with that. And one of the things that I talk about with a lot of people is practice asking for things. Practice asking for silly little things that really don't matter if you get a no. So you're building up tolerance to rejection.
You're building up resilience there by getting a no. I love that. Yeah.
Exactly. One of the exercises that I did with my group members recently was come up with 10 things that you need to ask and just hope for a yes. If you get a no, you are building up resilience and resistance to, reacting to the no. And you might be amazed by the things that people actually say yes to that you didn't expect them to say yes to. You can go to a coffee shop, and if you want, go to one that you never go to, so it's kind of out of your regular routine, and just walk up to the barista and say, "Hey, would you give me a free coffee today?" and see what they say. sometimes they're so surprised or charmed or, whatever it is, or maybe they're just in a good mood that they'll do it.
Now that's interesting. That's so interesting. Do you know why? When I used to have in-person clients, and which was rare that I would see them in person, but every now, if I lived in the same city, I say, hey, let's do an in-person.
Mhm.
And I said to one of my clients, I said, you're not succeeding because you are so afraid of asking for money. And he said, no, you're right. I said, you will never succeed if you have this deep fear
Yeah.
of asking people for money for he was a speaking coach, a very good one.
Mhm.
I said, and we're going to do a little thing right now. Are you willing? He said, yes. We were in a Panera Panera cafe.
Uh-huh.
And I said, I want you to go to that person right there at the cashier, and I want you to ask her for $1. He said, you want me to go? I said, yes, I do. And he said, and he didn't want to fail in front of his coach. So he went up and he said, excuse me, could I have $1, please? And she went, um, okay. She said, well, I just have to go get my purse. And she went and she figured out how to get the $1 to him.
Wow.
Okay. And I watched the whole thing and it was fascinating. Okay. Because I've done this before. I used to
Yeah.
do this with my clients. And he came back and he said, I just got $1. I said, how did that feel? He said, well, it was scary. And I was so afraid of what she was going to think about me. But then I went with it and I didn't care. And I could see the way she was like, okay, he must mean, why does he need the $1? Well, I guess he really needs it. Okay. She didn't even ask what for. She was just, sure. She goes, okay, yeah, all right, I'll go get you $1. And she went and she got her purse and she got the $1 and she gave it to him. So
That's amazing.
ask and you shall receive.
Exactly.
And it gets you over so much fear of what are they thinking? What are they going to think about me? Maybe I'm not going to get it. Changed his life. And he said, wow, you just got me past all fear of asking for money because that was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life.
Absolutely. And there are a lot of coaching exercises around this, actually. Just, ask for 10 no's, ask for 50 no's, ask for 100 no's. Keep building them up, keep trying for more and more things. Think about things you really want. And you might be amazed at the responses that you get and how you start feeling. A, when you get some positive responses, and B, how the fear of rejection decreases as you get more exposed to it. So, yeah. And it's the same thing with any kind of criticism.
Okay, so thank you for all that. Now, what's one tip you want to leave people with? One overriding tip or philosophy or mindset about how to succeed as a neurodivergent or highly perceptive or highly sensitive person in the workplace?
The most important message I have is you are not broken. You are not crazy. You are not alone. You have gifts and you have leadership assets. And the most important thing is to learn how to harness and embrace and leverage those assets because they will help you with the inevitable challenges and struggles that we all have.
For sure. Okay, very valuable. Thank you so much, Rachel, for being on the show. Thank you for listening. And if you love this, then write a review and share it with people. And we'll see you on the next episode. You're listening to the Business Wealth Impact Podcast, your source for empowering information and cutting-edge ideas from the world's top minds. I'm your host, Jeanne Amlour, founder of seven-figure coaching company, Jeanne Amlour International. Join me on a journey to unleash your potential and create your highest success. Welcome to Business Wealth Impact.